program. So it was this MBA, executive MBA program that integrated design thinking and how people were learning strategy and financial operations and branding. Figure Eight Thinking is the company that I started as my side hustle on the side of being a professor back in 2015. And then I realized about 18 months later, I was having a lot more fun with those projects. So I left academia and I've been happily building up my business since then. So what I do at Figure Eight Thinking is I advise companies, leaders at companies on how to apply creativity and strategic foresight in order to get to more transformative business results. I'm passionate about helping people connect the dots between creativity and the ROI of business. And I'll dig a little bit into that during our presentation. So I have a few touch points during my presentation where I'm going to ask questions, and I might come back to this section, to this view. But for the most part, I'm going to share slides with you. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to share my slides.
If I could just interject one more time, people should feel free to use chat for questions or comments. It's a small enough group that, you know, depending on how you're going, Natalie, people can raise their hand or literally raise the little blue hand.
Yeah, and Ben, if you wouldn't mind helping me with that, if you're noticing there's a couple questions, please just pause me, and I would love to answer any questions. So thank you for that. If I say something doesn't make sense or makes you think of something that you have a question about, please share your question, and we'll pause and talk about it. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Oh, that's bizarre. That's actually the wrong view. That's okay. All right. So I prepared a presentation that I'm calling the Creativity Leap, how to unleash your intuition, improvisation, and curiosity in times of uncertainty. And if you feel so moved, I'd love to hear from you on social media. You can tag me on Instagram and Twitter with @NatWNixon, and you can just type in #CreativityLeap. That's a tag I've been using quite a bit because that's the name of the book that, as Ben said, launches next Tuesday. I wanted to start with this image. This is an image that comes from a Harvard Business Review article that posted in early March. If you recall, way back in early March of 2020, we as a country were just starting to deal with the realities of COVID-19. And this Harvard Business Review article is called "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief." The reason I'm bringing this up is not to be a Debbie Downer and to make you feel sad, but I thought there were two really interesting and cool insights from this article. So the article's by a guy named Scott Baronato, and he interviewed someone named David Kessler. David Kessler is considered to be a world-renowned expert on grief. The first takeaway I got from this article is that he explained that what we usually consider as the 5 stages of grief, they're totally non-linear. So for example, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and then acceptance. And I certainly have at various points gone from, denying the extent of COVID-19, oh, this will be gone in like 6 weeks and we'll be back to normal, to kind of bargaining with like, oh, maybe I can go into the supermarket. If I'm only going to duck in, I don't have to wear a mask. Then sometimes there's this deep level of sadness, and then finally acceptance. Well, what was really one cool takeaway was that these stages do not happen in a linear fashion. So if you feel yourself at various moments in these past months feeling like you've accepted everything, and then all of a sudden you get really angry at the situation, then you feel sad, totally normal. So that was one takeaway. This next takeaway was that David Kessler added a 6th stage of grief, and the 6th stage of grief he added is meaning. The reason I love that is that if we just ended on acceptance as that final stage of grief, it kind of, we're ending like on a plateau. But when we then say, actually, another stage that we need to add on is meaning and purpose, well, that means that actually brings us to an uptick in us dealing with these situations of COVID-19, as well as the social injustice unrest that's happening since the murder of George Floyd. And of course, there have been subsequent situations. There was just one in Atlanta over the weekend, or maybe it was just before the weekend began. But we constantly are having to deal with meaning making, and creativity is about the business of making meaning. And the reason why that is so important is because all of us, I was just talking to one of your colleagues on this Zoom session who is with Republic Bank, and she was just talking about, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but you're talking about preparing so many of your clients for the PPP loan program, and the amount of stress and uncertainty and a lot of attention to detail that was needed. All of us, no matter what sector we're in, we are having to reorient. And companies that are having to reorient even before COVID-19, I observed we're going through a bit of what I call innovation churn, right? Everyone is trying to be considered innovative, trying to build a culture of innovation. And I've always had this creeping sensation that we're talking over and around each other when we talk about innovation. We kind of each mean something slightly differently about innovation. And in my view, in order to avoid this churn, especially during time, we need to really identify what is our true north. We actually have to start with creativity, because creativity is the engine for innovation, and creativity is about meaning making. It's about the business of figuring out our purpose in our work, in our organizations, and in our lives. So a lot of what I lead with is this idea that in what we're calling this fourth industrial revolution, which is right now, it's not in the future, it's the train has left the station, a creativity leap is necessary. And the opportunity is for us to use all of this ubiquitous technology to amplify what it means to be human. So if you haven't yet heard this term, fourth industrial revolution, it refers to, the first industrial revolution was based all about steam, right? And it was about mechanization. The next revolution was about electronics. The third revolution was about computer systems. And now this fourth industrial revolution is about the cloud. And it means tech is ubiquitous. So in my office right now, I'm going to try to whisper, an Alexa. If I say it too loudly, it will go off. But that's an example of augmented reality, right? We're doing surgeries through robotics. If we don't know the answer to something, we Google it through artificial intelligence. But the thing to remember is that the algorithms will only be as good as the questions that we humans ask. So the opportunity in this industrial revolution, instead of the technology dwarfing us humans, the opportunity is for the technology to amplify what it means to be human. And I believe that what it means to be uniquely human is creativity. So a lot of what I do in my work with clients is I help them identify signals on the landscape. And that's really what the crux of foresight work is. Foresight is not about telling the future. Foresight is about being astutely observant of the present so that you can identify multiple possible future scenarios. So I want to share with you a couple of signals on the landscape that I've been collecting that have pointed me into this direction of identifying creativity as being supremely important. So here's the first signal. This comes from the World Economic Forum. 5 years ago, back in 2015, the World Economic Forum declared that, okay, guys, by 2020, creativity is going to be the number 10 job skill that you absolutely will need to have. The next year, 1 year later, the World Economic Forum said, actually, we think creativity is going to rank as the number 3 job skill among the top 10 job skills that you'll need to have. And what's fascinating about that is that job skills numbers 1 and 2 were problem solving and critical thinking, which PS, problem solving, critical thinking are all embedded in creativity. So net, creativity is the number 1 skill that we will need going forward. So that's one signal. The second signal that I want to share actually comes from a bit of pop culture. I love watching really good TV, and you have to admit there's a lot of time now to watch television, and there's a lot of good Netflix to watch. And here's three moments that actually also point to this, what I call the human quotient. So the young man in the upper left corner is a character named Junior. He's from a hit sitcom called Blackish. And in this scene, Junior is explaining in this exasperated way to his parents why he is not going straight on to college, even though he's been admitted. He wants to take a gap year. His parents are totally disgusted. This is what they've worked for their entire lives, to move up the social class, and they want the best for their kids, and they're not quite having it. The second image in the middle is a character named Abigail. She's the daughter of Madeline in the series Big Little Lies. And Abigail is looking up in a really disgusted way at her mom, who's played by Reese Witherspoon, because she doesn't even want to apply to college. She is going to really extend the gap, and she explains to her mother, in fact, she already has a job with a startup. Now, the reason why both of these moments happened about 2 or 3 years ago. The reason why I collected them as signals on the landscape is because these were indicators, in my view, of younger people, the Gen Zers, the Centennials, wanting to learn by doing, wanting experiential learning. They weren't really up for the sage on stage model of teaching and learning anymore. And I have been predicting for a while that we're going to see a return back to the apprentice model. We're already seeing the rise of really a lot of interest in things like masterclass and the alt MBA, which was started by Seth Godin. And there's also another one called the 15-minute MBA, right? So there's going to be a blur between companies and educational institutions. The other indicator signal on the landscape, which I think is a lot of fun, is from another show I like called Billions. And this is the lady in the rectangle on the far right. Her character is Wendy Rhodes. And Wendy is a psychologist. Maybe she's actually a psychiatrist. She's employed as part of the C-suite at this really aggressive, testosterone-driven venture capital firm based in Manhattan, based in New York City, called Axe Capital. And in the midst of primarily male employees who wake up every morning just to make another $1 million minimum on the market, she is helping them be attuned to their inner child, navel gaze, meditate, do deep breathing, visualization. So this was really fascinating to me, that here you have this shift in corporate culture, especially in a pretty conservative sector like finances, where you have this value of people who are in touch with the human quotient, specifically with the humanities. So all these are signals pointing to the growing importance of creativity, because soft skills are not some mushy, touchy-feely thing. Soft skills are hardcore. And by soft skills, I mean empathy, active listening, the ability to collaborate, the ability to apply critical thinking and asking different new questions and building curiosity for really complex situations. These will be critical, especially in a world in the fourth industrial revolution where basic tasks will be taken over through automation. So what's left? Our ability to solve complex problems. We could do that by amplifying creativity, because we are living in increasingly VUCA environments that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I can pause here. Are there any questions or comments that people want to share?
I don't see any hands waving.
Okay, cool. I'll continue. Thanks. So, this idea of VUCA environments is not new. So I was able to spend pre-COVID 3 weeks in January of this year in the Middle East, in a really teeny weeny country called Qatar. And I was in their capital city, Doha. And I love the Middle East. I've lived in Israel. I've been to the United Arab Emirates, and so being in Qatar was a real bonus. And what I always love about being in the Middle East is how ancient it is. You feel how ancient and old a place it is. It truly is. You can sense it's the center of civilization. At the same time, in a city like Doha, it's just total dynamic embrace of modernity and technology, like in a way that we are not doing in the United States even yet. So when I'm in places like that, I'm reminded that, for example, these are people who are descended from the Bedouin people who constantly had to. I mean, you talk about navigating uncertainty, like something like the desert landscape. I'm not sure even if the complexity that we deal with today, which just looks differently, can top that. So as humans, we are equipped to navigate complexity. It's actually not something new for us. So what I'm proposing is that we navigate and manage complexity with complexity. And that principally is creativity. Now, I call this the chewing gum method. Chewing gum. And what I mean by that is if you're walking along and you accidentally step on a wad of chewing gum, one of the best ways to remove chewing gum from the bottom of your shoe is with other chewing gum, right? It's that tackiness that helps to remove it. So the best way to navigate and manage complexity is with another complex system, which is creativity. So here's a good time to ask. I'm going to ask you this. I want you to fill this in the chat room. What do you think creativity is? And then I'll share how I think about it. But just curious. Just type in the chat. What is creativity to you? And let's just take 60 seconds. And I have a timer, so I'm going to time you on this. Just start adding into the chat. What is creativity? And Ben, if you don't mind reading off some of the answers. New ideas.
I was going to start typing. Okay, so new ideas. Creativity is something original, fresh, free flow thinking, openness,
Nice.
original ideas, something new, how you work with words, hands, mind, and heart. So, they're going fast. Thinking out of the box, solving complex challenges with design and wit, and a dose of joy. The ability to find new solutions to new or old problems. It is possibilities, artistic, radical change, endless possibilities, thinking without confines.
I love these.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Creativity.
I love these. So the cool part about working in the space of creativity is that I'm always learning. I'm always being exposed to new perspectives and new ways of doing things. I love the ways that you guys are framing creativity. Very, very cool. Very interesting. All right. So I've given this quite a bit of thought. It's part of my research, part of my consulting work. And sometimes we think of creativity only in the domain of artists. So maybe when you think of creativity, you think of this romantic version of someone sitting in a studio, a sunlight filtering through a skylight, and they're painting away. Maybe you think of people who have the ability to have utter reckless abandon and can jam out on in a band. Maybe that's your vision of creativity. Perhaps you're thinking of the grace and expertise of dancers on a stage. Here's how I think about creativity. I think that creativity is our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and create novel value. That's what I think it is in a nutshell. And I'm being a little facetious when I say in a nutshell, because of course that's actually not as easy to do on a consistent basis as it's written here on the page. But one of the goals that I have in my work and in this book that I've just written is that I want us to stop ghettoizing creativity in the arts. And I want us to stop doing that because that's not fair to artists and it's not beneficial to our society at large. The truth is that we are designed as humans to be creative. We see this in our children. We may recall this in ourselves when we were little. We have this incredible propensity to play, and we downplay play as we get older and the more educated we get and in our work environments. But when we are playful and we are at play, we're much more experimental. We're much more curious. We learn to negotiate. We learn to collaborate. We learn to team. We learn to explore, and we learn to practice to get better at something. It's all those elements of wonder and rigor. So we actually, when we think about it, we actually are designed for this. And so that's what I talk about in this book, which is called The Creativity Leap: Unleash Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition at Work. I interviewed over 50 people from a range of sectors to write this book. And I just want to show you a few examples of what I learned. So I actually posted on social media this morning about Gary and Amy Mainoff. They are farmers. And one of the things I write about in my book is that I think that farmers are the original hackers. And I say that because, Gary and Amy have a 5-acre fruit farm in New Hope, Pennsylvania. By the way, you got to get out to their farm, especially since I'm talking to people in Philly. You will become an apple or a peach snob. They have the most scrumptious fruit, but I digress. One of the things that they've done in the effort to be innovative, they started with creativity. They spiked their ability to ask different questions, to be experimental, to improvise. And what they're standing in front of is their new cidery, because they're constantly trying to figure out we are small, humble farmers. How do we connect to people who are expecting something new and fresh and faster and better, right? So through a series of events, which you can learn more about in the book, they actually decided we could start a cidery. And so they actually have about at least four different lines of semi-alcoholic ciders, which are really cool. And the woman at the top in the middle is Nicole Pittman. Nicole is an attorney. She is our country's foremost policy expert on child sex offenders. And what I learned from her was her ability to ask different questions and to intuit in order to build really opposing sides of the aisle, also opposing stakeholders together to be able to come to humane solutions around a really sticky, complex problem. The guy in the black and white photo is our family plumber. That's John Harker. And he was incredibly poetic when I interviewed him and talked about how all he has is his flashlight. He has to see what's behind the wall. In my view, plumbers are systems designers. They have to be able to problem solve with electricians, with carpenters, with the architects in order to see a complete integrative view. Finally, on the right is Céline Barrel. She is sniffing my arm. She is a nose. She's a perfumier. She is at International Flavors and Fragrances. And Céline, who actually is French, she is excellent at balancing chemistry, hardcore chemistry, and intuition in order to, she says that her superpower is to make real for people something that no longer exists. Think about when you smell something that evokes a memory of a time in your life, a person in your life. How magical is that? So this to me is creativity. And the guy in the red t-shirt, he's Daniel Goods from NASA. He is a designer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California. He hits up like an internal instigator for all the astronauts and scientists to reframe their scientific projects. And Randy Swearer, as a former colleague of mine from the university, he now works for Autodesk in San Francisco, and he's the head of learning futures. So this is how we can also be thinking about creativity. Creativity is a productivity play, and it is a competency. What I mean by that, it is a muscle that we can exercise and that we can all get better at. And if I can geek out for a moment, it stems from complex chaos theory. Creativity is a chaotic system. A K-word is a word that Dee Hock made up. And Dee was the first president of Visa International. That's the Visa credit card that you have in your wallet. When Dee was tasked with leading this global organization based on the virtual exchange of currency, which is really what credit cards do, he was stumped at first, but he was taking a walk through the woods and he was like, gosh, what if I can make this organization look more like nature? Instead of as trying to design organizations made up of boxes and arrows. So he said, what if it had a bit of chaos and a little bit of order? And then he said, what if it was this chaos, again, a word that he made up? As he said, we see chaotic systems constantly in nature. That's how forests spring up. There's a little sapling that falls to the ground and it springs up a tree and multiple trees and it recycles over and over. It's the way our bodies heal, right? If you skin your knee, there's not a permission slip culture that goes to work. There's self-organizing, emergent, and adaptive systems, localized systems at play. That's the definition of complexity. It's self-organizing, it's emergent, it's adaptive. We see this in jazz music. Jazz has both the chaos or randomness of the magic that happens through improvising, and it also has the order that jazz musicians need. Jazz musicians are astute with music theory. They do incessant practicing. That's the structure and order that they bring to their skill and their craft. So I went a step further, and actually I'm telling you this story in kind of a linear fashion. The way I got to all these ideas was a lot more loopier, but I can look at this retrospectively now. But you can see how I was really influenced by these ideas around chaotic systems. And I learned about chaotic systems when I was working on my PhD, which I did while working full time. And I ended up looking at improvisational organizations. But you can see how I was really influenced by this work, because wonder is the chaos part, right? And rigor is the order part as I think about creativity. I went ahead and even made a card game called the Wonder Rigor Discovery Deck. And in this deck, I use it a lot when I'm working with teams to help them with problem solving. There's 4 domains that you can work through in the Wonder Rigor game. But the first part is to prime people's mindset, because what I find is we don't allow ourselves to really get steeped in the wonder. And even when we think we're doing the rigor, sometimes it's really just busy work. So a lot of what I have to do at the onset is just to prime people's minds very differently. So this is an example of a question where I'm asking people to reflect on spaces and places and people that make them stop in their tracks and catch their breath. This is where wonder starts. So what is wonder? Wonder is about curiosity and dreaming and envisioning. It's about supposing and performance. And the great Socrates was known for having said that wisdom begins in wonder. So way back then, we were appreciating wonder. And then the Jewish theologian and civil rights activist, Abraham Heschel, he in his writings wrote that wonder, rather than doubt, is actually the root of all knowledge, which I thought was pretty cool. So wonder is pretty significant. Rigor is about practice. It's about discipline. It's critique. It's about showing up over and over and over again. It's time on task. And I love that Leonardo da Vinci is credited for having said that any obstacle can be destroyed through rigor. So I have 2 corollaries that I made up around wonder and rigor, which is as follows: that wonder is found in the midst of rigor. You know this if you've ever spent time filling out your taxes, or creating some new type of Excel spreadsheet, or weeding in your garden, or washing the baseboards of your house. It's really tedious, rigorous work, right? It's in those moments often that a thought of wonder occurs to you. The corollary to that is that rigor can't be sustained without wonder. And that's the gosh honest truth. So when I talked in the beginning of this presentation about innovation churn, in a lot of our corporate environments, there's a lot of innovation churn because there's a lot of going from meeting to meeting, and emphasis on procedure and the rule book, all in the pursuit of innovation. But all of that rigor is just not sustainable without also designing space and time for wonder. So I have a question for you. I'd like you to share out. I'm first going to ask people to share out on who, living or dead, do you consider to be a wonder mentor for you? That's my first question. So think about that for a moment. And then my next question is going to be, who living or dead is a rigor mentor for you? And some of you may find that it's kind of overlaps, the boundaries get blurred, that it's kind of the same person, and that's okay, that's cool. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's go back to the chat. First question, who living or dead is one of your wonder mentors? Who would you list? Please share in the chat.
Everybody's thinking.
Got some now. Mom. Oh, the dad for wonder and the mom for rigor. Cool. Edward Tuft. The name of the farm I'll write here is Manoff Farms and Gardens in New Hope, PA. And yes, everyone can improve their creativity. That's my job, to help people do that. Absolutely.
That was a question for later, but I had to get it off.
Oh, okay. We can do more on that. Dubra's dad in both cases. Nice. Someone else? College professor. Sounds like a great professor for wonder. Nice. Gene Kelly. Ah, love that. Love Gene Kelly's dancing. Maybe two more, and let's start doing rigor. A couple of rigor examples, please. Who are your mentors for rigor? No one else? No one has any mentors for rigor? I saw two earlier. Heather, her mom, and I think that's it. The same as wonder. Thanks, Cynthia.
Would they be the same because they play off each other?
Yeah, like, so for example, one of my mentors for wonder and rigor is the modern dancer Twyla Tharp, who puts an intense amount of rigor into her practice as a dancer. She's famous for having said that before you can think out of a box, you have to start with the box. So she's very much about structure and procedure and systems. But what she has been able to create because of pushing against those boundaries is the total wonder part as a dancer. So I think she's really cool. Production says wonder, Keith Haring, rigor, Bill Gates. Cool. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that, guys. Let me continue back on to the rest of the presentation. We're just about done. So there's three tactics that I like to give people to improve their creativity. I call these the 3 I's. They're about inquiry, your ability to improvise, and your ability to intuit. So I call it the 3I creativity framework. Inquiry is essential because it's all about curiosity. And what's really tragic in our society is that we have started to equate curiosity with either being threatening or ignorance. And I noticed even in my career as a professor, there will always be those moments. It'd be the moment that I always looked forward to when I would ask students, are there any questions? But then there'll always be this moment of hesitation or deafening silence. And asking questions is a way of thinking. That's something that I learned by reading a lot of the work from Warren Berger. He wrote a book called A More Beautiful Question. Asking questions is a way of thinking. And yes, you are ignorant about the particular issue. That's why you're asking a question, but that's also the only way we can learn. And Warren Berger, in his work, he did research where he learned that the most innovative companies actually have leaders that lead with inquiry. They lead with asking questions. They lead by rewarding people who ask a better question, a different question, and they shift away from only being solutions-based to being process-based. The improvisation part is really critical because improvisation is about being super rooted in the present. It's about your ability to adapt, to be an active listener. And I'll give you an example of an incredibly improvisational organization. And often people are surprised to hear this, but the Ritz-Carlton is actually an incredibly improvisational organization. I did my PhD research working with them. And as hoity-toity and luxury-based an organization they are in terms of their brand, the only way they're able to consistently surprise and delight guests at like this optimal level is they equip each individual employee to be able to improvise, to adapt in the moment. They even have this feedback loop motto, which is that we are, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. And finally, intuition. I created an MBA program. And so in the 6 years when I was running that program, a lot of my professional network extended to the entrepreneurial startup world, a lot more people in the business spaces. And we do not talk about intuition in business school. You don't touch it in MBA programs. You certainly don't talk about it in law school or in medical school. But what I observed is that every successful leader, every successful entrepreneur will have a moment when they're telling their origin story, when they will say something like, something told me not to do the deal, or something told me to work with her over him. And I started thinking, well, what's that something? Why, I think that's intuition. And so I did some research around that. And in fact, in my book, one of the people I interview and talk about is the CEO of Vectorworks, which is a software firm. He is a PhD in engineering. I was a little hesitant to ask him about intuition because I thought, oh gosh, he heads up this tech firm. He's an engineer, PhD. He's probably going to laugh me out of his office when I asked him his thoughts about intuition. And he totally embraced it. He totally said that absolutely he uses his intuition to help him and assist him in making decisions. So intuition is also this type of sonar and this muscle. The more you use it and listen to it, the stronger it gets. The more you ignore it, the flabbier and dimmer it gets. So these are the 3 ways that we can exercise it. And so I'd like to leave you with practical tips on how you can start acting on these ideas. If you want to build a culture of curiosity, insist on what are called creative abrasion teams. Creative abrasion is a word that Jerry Hirschberg made up. Jerry used to be the head of design for Nissan International. Whenever he would have projects that were kind of complex, he would insist that it was not only people from the design side of the organization who were part of the team. He would insist that people from sales, people from manufacturing, people from finance were also part of the team. His point being that most of the time we run for the hills when we think about having to deal with a topic or a process that could cause friction or abrasion. Jerry Hirschberg's insight was that friction, if you think about striking a match, that's friction, right? Friction actually creates energy. So he said, why not just convert that energy that we're going to get from friction anyway into something positive? So the next time you want to try to lead with curiosity, make sure you build really diverse teams. And I have a lot more of that in the book. Improvise. The best way to become a better improviser, you don't have to be an amazing jazz musician or someone who could like rock it on the Saturday Night Live stage, but do become a clumsy student of something. You will become incredible at improvising. I know this myself. I studied dance since I was age 4. And in my middle-aged years, I'm now a clumsy student of the tango and of the foxtrot. And I'm not good. And I learned to laugh at myself. I learned to ask better questions. And I'm totally needing to be an active listener, to adapt, to say yes and to build on stuff. I build on my mistakes. So that's a good way to learn how to become a better improviser. And thirdly, if you don't believe me in the value of your intuition, start documenting and journaling about the times when you have followed the nudge and what the result was, and then the times you ignored it and what the results were, right? So start really, even with these 3 suggestions. Going to end on, if you're not yet convinced, about the business ROI of creativity leaps. I actually have this on my website. There's on the home page of my website, there is on the upper carousel, there's something called the value of the pause. And there's this PDF that you can link to. And it talks about how when we start with creativity, there's 3 things that get ignited. One is inventive thinking. When we have more inventive thinking, we start exploring different business models. That leads to new strategic partnerships, and then we uncover new revenue streams. That's a business ROI of creativity. Secondly, the best creativity comes when we are collaborating with people who don't think in the same ways as we do. Shorter term, that's really hard, right? It's hard to have to translate what you do to others. But in the longer term, it leads to higher productivity, improved efficiencies. And when you have greater efficiencies, you lower costs. Because one of the reasons why collaboration leads to higher efficiencies is that you begin to reduce redundancies. And third, when you decide to exercise your own creativity, you step away from only what's tinkering and rattling around in your brain, and you become customer obsessed. You lean much more into the needs of the people who are buying your stuff, right? So you start to develop and sell human-centered products and services and experiences that ultimately leads to greater value and sustained brand loyalty. This is the end of my presentation. I'd love to stay in touch with you. If you would like to receive my newsletter and a sample chapter of my new book, you can text the word create to the number 33777. You could also just email me. You can email me at Natalie@Figure8Thinking, and I'll add you to the newsletter subscription and give you a sample chapter of my book. I've also built out a YouTube channel that has a lot of great inspiring content. A lot of my webinars are there, some tips, some of my talks. So definitely check out my YouTube channel. Would love to see you as a subscriber. And oh yeah, Ben mentioned that with my book coming out, I have some fun events. I did a great conversation with John Maeda on Tuesday. It was a lot of fun. John Maeda is the Chief Experience Officer for Publicis Sapient, and he's this guru at the intersection of tech and design. So we had a really fun conversation, and that is available on his LinkedIn page as well as on mine. It was about a 25-minute conversation. It was cool. I timed myself, just wanted to make sure I was respectful of everyone's time. Galit is an augmented reality expert. She's based in Toronto. We're going to have a morning coffee on Facebook Live next Tuesday morning. Next Tuesday is my book launch day. Fei Wu is a digital marketing expert. We're going to do a lunchtime chat at noon next Tuesday. King Britt, some of you who may be Philly natives may remember King. King is now a global DJ. He's a Pew Fellow recipient. He's now a professor out at a UC school. And he's responsible for having been part of the production of some of the music from The Roots, Jill Scott, Mike Poyser. So we're going to have an evening spinning conversation. And then finally, next Thursday, I'm going to have a chat with Seth Godin on his LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live. So that's what's coming up for me. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me. That's my email. And I'll save a couple minutes for any final questions.
If anybody does have a question, you can just unmute and ask it. My question was just from one of your earlier slides about learning creativity. And I mean, obviously you started dancing and you can be a clumsy creative student. But can anybody just learn to be a good drawer, or is it more the concept of bringing your creativity to work and coming up with ideas?
So I have a non-tested theory that when we are a clumsy student in something artistic, it translates into our confidence to be more experimental in our work. But you don't have to test out this clumsy student stuff in the artistic space. Doesn't necessarily have to be in drawing or in painting or in dance or in music. If you know, Ben, you mentioned in high school you loved cars. If you love whatever it is that you like to tinker in, whatever it is that is your hobby, creativity is about recombinations of ideas. So when you have to be in a puzzle solving mode, like let's take, you know, I'm not a car person, but I imagine that when you're taking apart a car and then trying to put it back together again or trying to figure out what went wrong in the engine, there's a lot of problem solving that goes where you have to hack things. For me, learning a new technique of dance, learning choreography is basically pattern recognition. Learning music is music is a type of code, right? So I do not at all think it should be restricted to something in the artistic realm, but definitely allow yourself to be a learner and a student of something.
Anyone else have any questions? Oops. Oh, any tips about how to convince clients and managers about the need for this creative view?
Yeah, you can cite, you know, really respected, robust institutions like the World Economic Forum. You can, you know, all the major management consultancies from PricewaterhouseCoopers to Deloitte are all referencing creativity as an essential skill for upskilling, for reskilling. We are not going back to the old normal. The fact is that if a job is task based, then all organizations are going to need to figure out how to, their value proposition is going to shift. It will have to shift or else they won't be around anymore. And the way that they can shift is by starting to hire for creativity. It means you have to interview very differently, cultivate creativity in the organization, and then sustain it. And they could also talk to me. I'd be happy to help. Anybody else?
I think
Awesome. Okay. Oh, sorry.
I think I told everybody they can unmute themselves, and then I think it was locked. But anyway,
Oh,
I think we got to the questions.
oh
Um,
no.
I know you have to get going, so I just want to thank you again for taking the time, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks,
And,
Ben.
I think people are going to run out and buy it, or at least
Hope so.
get it delivered.
Yeah, it's available in paperback, audio, and digital. And if you're not sure, you know, certainly go to the website, download a free sample chapter, and I hope that you'll join in one of the events next week. That would be awesome. Thank you for having
Okay.
me.
Thank you. If anybody wants to hang out and network a little bit, we can do that. Natalie, take care. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Megan, can you unmute?
Yep.
Okay. I had to click on that allow you guys to unmute, which I think you can now. Heather, can you? No? Unmute.
Now I can. Yeah, now I'm unmuted.
All participants are unmuted. Heather, how you doing?
Really great. My son started camp this week, day camp at YMCA, so I'm literally in the house by myself right now. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Been since I could say that.
So it's a day camp and it's open, but with restrictions and whatnot?
So he's at YMCA day camp, just right here in, it's actually in Philly. I live in Salem, but it's in Philly. And they have small groups. The kids don't have to wear masks, but the camp counselors do. And they're not allowed to have like one big, you know, morning and afternoon kind of session with all the kids combined. They take temperatures at the door, which I think everywhere does anymore. And so far so good. Today's day 4, you know.
So you're home all alone and you're on a Zoom call.
And I'm not muted. Usually I mute because the background noise can be a lot. But no, I'm all by myself. Awesome. hopefully the schools will be able to, you know, get back. We'll see in the fall, but
Yeah.
if this goes well, every kind of, the camp is not very full compared to previous years. Like he was in it last year, and there was a lot more kids, but it could be twofold factor. You know, maybe some people are still home and they don't want to do it, or you know, not interested. They think it's too early. Maybe.
Cynthia, have we met? Have you been to CCPA events?
Yeah, it's been a few years, probably a couple years. I've been pretty inactive, but I saw this one come across. I get all the newsletters and I follow what's going on. Yeah, but I saw this come across and it was really perfect timing. So it was a great presentation. It was very good. Thank you.
What business are you in?
Well, I have a branding and graphic design firm. So I'm thinking of sending Natalie a question because we use the word creativity all the time in the more traditional sense of, you know, creating something, creating creative graphic design and creative messaging. So it's sort of using that same word in a different way. I feel like we need a different word almost, but just because our business is so much